Well, welcome to Christ and Culture. This is Pastor Jeff Short. Glad to have you along for the commentary we do today. Today we're going to be looking at a topic that we've dealt with before, haven't done so recently, but it's always in the background for the last 2 or 3 years, and that is the censorship, the kind of pressure on people in the United States to line up with the official narrative that the government puts out, the cancel culture. We're going to talk about how this has come into the church, has affected pastors, how they present the topic of the Bible and topics in the news, and talk about things to their culture and their church congregation. And so today we're going to be talking about the effects of the censorship climate, and we're going to look back at an article that was written recently about a comparison with the old Soviet Union just before it collapsed and what we are experiencing now today in the United States and around the Western world as far as the basic micromanagement of culture and the totalitarianism of speaking correctly, political correct speech, and all of the other things that really undermine our basic rights to speak and teach and carry on Christian church activity and Bible teaching. And this is heading in a bad direction. And so I want to talk about it today because this affects all of us. If we're Christians, we go to church, we hear sermons given. How much of those sermons have been filtered through the government filter, or how many of those pastors have self-censored their messages, or they can't talk about certain topics because they know that they might offend people or be reported to the authorities, and that they would then have certain punishments brought upon them, and all of these things. Why are these factors even coming into consideration in the church? Shouldn't we be able to go to church and hear a message and say the only thing that is between our ears and that person's speech is whatever that pastor felt led of the Lord to speak about? Nothing to do with government, nothing to do with policies, government policies, and so on and so forth. We shouldn't have to be worried about, are we hearing a message from the Bible, or are we hearing a state-approved message by the powers that be? And often we don't think about this, but the pandemic has really brought a lot of this up to the surface. And I am personally aware of experiencing censorship on a level that I never thought I would. Because being a broadcaster, putting sermons and messages and teachings on the internet, I have experienced big tech censorship on not just one topic, but I have experienced it on maybe 4 or 5 topics, that there are things that you can get your YouTube video or your internet content pulled down off of certain platforms if you venture into certain areas. And I'm not talking about incitement to violence. I'm not talking about trying to overthrow the government. I'm not talking about any of those things. I'm talking about certain aspects, for example, of COVID-19. And you can get your videos taken down off the internet if you don't talk the right way about COVID-19. Also, you can get your videos taken down if you question the election process in certain ways. You can get your videos taken down. You can get your videos taken down if you question the medical establishment policy on a certain point. You can get your videos taken down. You can get your videos taken down for all kinds of things. And it's a growing list of categories where you can get your video taken down. You can get it censored. You can be canceled. You can have your entire channel removed on the internet, on certain platforms, if you say certain things that are not illegal, but are just not in fitting with the government party line, especially the one today, the leftist, liberal, social Marxist, CRT driven administration right now, you can get your videos taken down. And we know for sure that we have the evidence, email evidence and the receipts. We know for sure that the government, this administration, has gone to big tech platforms and said, we want you to regulate this kind of content. And the platforms did it at the behest of the government. So we know that there is censorship going on, but what we don't realize is this censorship has already been taking place in other places around the world, most notably in the 1980s during the Soviet Socialist Republic, United Socialist Republic, U.S.S.R., before its collapse. It was doing exactly what this is. And today we're going to look at a letter, or actually a paper that was written by someone born in the U.S.S.R., worked in the U.S.S.R., and said, I'm seeing a lot of the things that were happening in the U.S.S.R. back in the 80s. I'm seeing that happening now in the U.S. before, and I have never seen it in the U.S. before, but now it's happening on a regular daily basis. And here is a video clip I want to bring up that will demonstrate exactly what I'm talking about. This video clip is from a program called the Dark Horse Inn, and let me bring that up. And this is the Weinsteins, Brett Weinstein and wife, Heather Haying, I think it is, her last name. She didn't obviously take the last name of her husband, Brett Weinstein. That probably gives you a clue as to her affiliation with the feminist movement. She did not take his name, but that is neither here nor there today. Right now, we're going to listen to her describing this paper written by a citizen of the former Soviet Union. And it is shocking because this is describing what we are seeing today in the United States. So we have to be aware of this, and we have to not let this kind of thing come, especially to our churches, most importantly to our churches. Now, it's happening right here in the country, but we also have to realize that it's happening in our churches too, because whenever you censor yourself, whenever you don't talk about certain topics, or when you do talk about certain topics that are being pushed by the leftist liberals in society, the cultural Marxists in society, whenever you see that, you have to really be careful that you are not a victim of propaganda. And so let's get into this, and I'm going to make some commentary, but this is shocking when you start thinking about all of the ramifications of this. Now, I have dealt with this topic before a couple years ago at the height of the coronavirus pandemic. There was a book that came out by Rod Dreher, Live Not by Lies, and it explains this, all of it, the Eastern Bloc countries, Soviet Union, under communism, how they controlled every aspect of society. That's the definition of a totalitarian state, and how they were able to censor people and make people disappear, banish them to the gulags. They were able to cancel a person, literally cancel them, take them out of society, ship them off to Siberia, and you would never hear from them again. Or the only time you would hear from them is if they come back and they're broken and they have no will to say anything other than whatever the party line is. So let's hear what Heather Haying has to say in describing this situation, and then I will stop at certain points and comment on it because this is very, very, very important. So let's jump into the video.
Anna Krylov's piece, which is called, just a minute, once I scroll to the top, Zach, you can show my screen here if you like. This is just a PDF of the piece. I'll link to at Substack in the show notes. From Russia with Love, Science and Ideology Then and Now. And again, she is born in the Soviet Union, now has been in the United States for a very long time, a chemist at U.S.S.R. And I wanted to say that she has organized her remarks in this piece, which I recommend you read the whole thing, into a discussion of the atmosphere of fear and self-censorship, which is related to what you've just been talking about, the omnipresence of ideology, with examples from science, the intolerance of dissenting opinions, suppression of ideas and people, censorship, and newspeak, to use Orwell's term, and the use of social engineering to solve real and imagined problems. And it's really easy to go to, using social engineering to, the problem with using social engineering to solve imagined problems is a double whammy that does not make it a good thing. It makes it even worse.
Okay, let me go over some of these highlighted points here. And I'll try to see if I can bring these up, bring that part of it up a little bit more, because I'm not getting a good... Okay, let me see if I can bring these up, because that's really what I want to focus on. I want to focus on what these 3 points are. Well, let me do it this way. Let me just go back over what she was saying and have her repeat those remarks, because I think it's worth repeating, that we get a good grasp of what's taking place here with these remarks. Let me go back to I should have stopped it before, but let's go back. Here we go. Okay.
Into a discussion of the atmosphere of fear and self-censorship, which is related to what you've just been talking about, the omnipresence of ideology.
Okay, the atmosphere of fear and censorship. Okay, that was what was happening in the Soviet Union for so long. There was an atmosphere of censorship, and it was pervasive. It was everywhere. Everybody knew that the truth that you heard on the radio, on the television, on all of the media outlets, in the newspapers, Pravda, everybody knew that that was, for the most part, simply not true. And you knew it, but you couldn't do anything about it. And you didn't know how much of it was true or how little of it was true, but you knew that it was not completely the truth, because you knew that the government was censoring the truth and pushing out propaganda.
Organized her remarks in this piece, which I recommend you read the whole thing, into a discussion of the atmosphere of fear and self-censorship, which is related to what you've just been talking about, the omnipresence of ideology, with examples from science.
Omnipresence of ideology. The omnipresence of ideology. So everywhere you go, there is this political push. Everything is politicized. Everything in the culture is politicized. Now, we hear a lot from the left today that, oh, it's so divided in this country. We're so divided. We've never been divided as much. It's terrible that there's so much division in our country. Yes, but why is there division in the country? Because we're being censored. We're being told that this is what you must believe. You must do this. You must act this way. You must speak this way. You must think this way. And you're being pushed. This ideology of the leftism is being pushed down. Children in school have to learn about the process of how they can become the opposite sex at a very young age. Children in school have to be introduced to the so-called drag queen story hour, and that's supposed to be normal. And if you're a parent that goes to a school board meeting and you question that, you are removed from the school board meeting because you're divisive. You're so divisive. You're political. You're politicizing everything. No, it's the people who are doing that, the drag queen story hour. They're the ones that are causing the division, but you're being gaslit. Another word that has come into the dictionary now of most people is gaslighting. And that is when you object to something absurd, like the scenario of children gathered around a drag queen, a man dressed up in a gaudy women's costume. When you object to that as a parent, you're the bad guy. You're the one that's not tolerant. You're divisive. And so that's what it's meant to be called, gaslit. And so we're seeing this all over, just like the Soviet Union did. Just like the Soviet Union did before the fall of communism. So let's go back over that.
He has organized her remarks in this piece, which I recommend you read the whole thing, into a discussion of the atmosphere of fear and self-censorship.
The fear of fear and self-censorship. So the people in the Soviet Union before it fell, they had a fear. Why were they fearful? Because they could lose their job, they could be canceled, they could lose their privileges, for example, of travel. They could have their travel restricted if they weren't ideological enough and didn't support the government's policy. Their children could be shut out of the university and education, higher education, because they don't believe the right things or adhere to the party policy strict enough. And so there's this atmosphere of fear. If the breadwinner of the family loses his job, fired because he's not Marxist enough or communist enough, then the family could starve, and they would actually let people starve. So there was a fear. And then self-censorship. You didn't want to say anything that could get you fired. You didn't want to say anything that could get you penalized or thrown in jail or sent out to Siberia. And this was all throughout all institutions of the church, even the church. The pastors were, a lot of them, patsies of the state, puppets of the state. You couldn't know whether you were actually hearing a sermon coming from the Bible or coming from the state through the self-censorship of your pastor. It was permeating. This poison permeates everything in society, and that's what we're beginning to see today in the United States. From the pulpits in churches and the way churches are careful to craft statements and responses to news items. Recently, we just had this whole stupid, it's very foolish, Kanye West. He's always been a big mouth, and he'd gotten away with a lot of things because he was a leftist, and he always would talk about things that were important to the leftists. Well, now he's flipped around, and he's being very politically incorrect and even anti-Semitic in some of his statements. And this fear and censorship atmosphere that we see in the U.S. today makes it so important that all the pastors and all the churches and all Christian leaders, they have to come out with some kind of official statement saying we're not anti-Semitic, we support the Jews and all of this. It is like ridiculous. Of course we support the Jews. Of course we're not anti-Semites. You don't have to even make a grandiose statement to that effect. It's a given. And yet, because of the fear and self-censorship atmosphere we have today, pastors, I guess, have to feel it's very important. The first thing next Sunday after some cultural news item of anti-Semitism, I disavow anti-Semitism. They have to virtue signal and show everybody that they're one of the good guys. So don't attack me. It's absurd.
Which is related to what you've just been talking about, the omnipresence of ideology, with examples from science.
We talked about that, the omnipresence of ideology. Everything is political in society. Everything is politicized. We mentioned the schools. Now churches are politicized. Black Lives Matter burned down city blocks in 2020. And now the cool, hip mega churches, they all have to get on board with the Black Lives Matter movement. And they have to, again, virtue signaling, saying, hey, I'm all on board. Let the cities burn if that's important to the civil rights and everything like this. Instead of asking the question, what's the threat of civil rights today? What's the big crisis? What is it? Why is this such a priority number one? No, you just have to virtue signaling, show that you're on the right side, and hope that nobody picks on you.
The intolerance of dissenting opinions.
The intolerance of dissenting opinions. So we live in an atmosphere today in the United States where everybody has to agree on everything, or else you're a bad guy. There is no room for discussion, or there's no room for dialogue or debate. If you don't line up with the leftist social Marxist view, you are canceled. There's no There's no discussion. You're destroyed. Your career will be over. They'll try to drive you into bankruptcy. You'll lose your job. This is just the way it was in the Soviet Union.
Suppression of ideas and people, censorship, and newspeak, to use.
Newspeak, George Orwell, if you've ever read the book 1984. And we see this all over the place. We just saw it the other day when the leftists passed in Congress the so-called Respect for Marriage Act. Now, you would say, as a Christian, you might say, well, boy, I respect marriage. We're taught in the Bible to honor and sanctify marriage and to respect marriage because it was God-given institution. So that sounds good, Respect for Marriage Act. What is the bill about? The bill is about codifying homosexual marriage, gay marriage, so-called. Has nothing to do with biblical marriage. And it has nothing to do with respect for marriage. It has everything to do with pushing homosexuality, the LGBTQ cause. And so they name it Respect for Marriage. Instead of what it really is disrespect for marriage. You know, marriage as an institution goes back as far as recorded history. And it's always been between a man and a woman. There's always has to be a man involved and a woman involved. Now, some cultures in the ancient times had more than one woman involved. Polygamy. But even so, most marriages have always been between a man, one woman, and one man. And the essential component has been you have to have a man and a woman. Okay. Now, in the last few years, that has been totally uprooted and turned on its head. And now pushing so-called gay marriage, homosexual marriage, two men and two women marrying, and to get that pushed through Congress, they named the bill Respect for Marriage, when in fact it's very much the opposite. It's a disrespect for marriage. That's what we see today.
Orwell's term, and the use of social engineering to solve real and imagined problems. And it's really easy to go to, using social engineering to, the problem with using social engineering to solve imagined problems is a double whammy that does not make it a good thing. It makes it even worse. But let me read a little bit here from her piece. Let's begin, writes Dr. Krylov, with the pervasive fear of speaking up. First, some definitions. Self-censorship is the refusal to produce, distribute, circulate, or express something for fear of punishment. Self-censorship is different from discretion. When I choose not to talk about my views on religion at the dinner table in order not to upset my mother-in-law, that is discretion. But when I choose not to say in a faculty meeting that considering only diversity candidates for a faculty search is discriminatory because I am afraid of being ostracized or worse, that is self-censorship. The flip side of self-censorship is compelled speech. That is when people express opinions that are not their own for fear of punishment. Again, there is a difference between telling little white lies in order to please someone and saying something you do not believe in for fear of repercussions.
So this is a big thing in our culture right now, where this was very big in the Soviet Union before it fell and under the communist regimes all over the world, including China right now. You are forced to act like you believe something, or you act like you are in favor of something, but inside you really have questions. You go, well, wait a minute. I don't know what I think about that. I haven't come to a conclusion. But you don't have time to come to the conclusion because you have to you're compelled and you have to comply with the ideology of the powers that be. And what is really pathetic is when you see a pastor in a pulpit 1 week after the Black Lives Matter riots feel obligated to get up in front of the church and say, you know what, it's true. We're all racist here. We have systemic racism in our hearts. We're guilty of sin, and we need to repent of white supremacy. And he's saying this because that's what he's expected to say by the powers that be. He has to say that, or else he will be labeled a racist. And so it's compelled speech. And that is the most pathetic thing in the church. The church needs to be prophetic. The church needs to be able to stop and say, no, wait, what? We've got all kinds of sins in the Bible, and we have them defined. And if I'm being called a racist, and if I have systemic racism in my heart, what does that mean? Define what you mean by racism. And we need to question. We need to have prophetic questioning of the party line. Because if not, we're just patsies of the state. We just do whatever the cultural elites and the power brokers in our culture tell us to do, and we just are pawns in a game of chess. And we need not to be that. We should not be that. The church needs to be free to speak the word of God and not be compelled to speak secular man's ideology.
Saying, "Oh, you look exactly like you did 30 years ago" to your high school sweetheart is not compelled speech. Compelled speech is when your institution issues a pledge to fight systemic racism, and you are afraid to ask, "Is there any evidence of systemic racism in our university?" Instead, you stand up at the faculty meeting and pledge to apply yourself fully to dismantling systemic racism. We've met some of those people. Self-censorship is a reaction to oppressive environments. It is a symptom of fear. It is an indicator of cancel culture. A couple more things here. Newspeak is invading, this again from Orwell's 1984, Newspeak is invading the English language in a truly Orwellian fashion. A few examples illustrate this. The journal Nature published a letter calling for the replacement of the accepted technical term quantum supremacy by quantum advantage. The authors regard the English word supremacy as violent and equate its usage with promoting racism and colonialism. They also warn us about the damage inflicted by using such terms as conquest. Professional societies, including the Association for...
And this is rampant all over the place. We don't have a lot of time, but I'll give it one example. My old alma mater, Wheaton College, back 20, 30 years ago, used to be called the Crusaders. That's what their name was. Their mascot was a crusader, and they had to change their name to something like the Wheaton Mastodons, or I don't even know what it is now, but they were compelled by the powers that be for offending, I guess, Muslims because the name was Crusaders. Crazy.
Computing machinery and tech companies, including Google and IBM, joined the suit. Last spring, I attended a meeting on quantum information science. It was a sad spectacle to watch grown-up scientists stumbling, trying to avoid the offensive word. About 90% conformed to this idiocy. So this is important because science has been trotted out so much in the last almost 3 years, right? As, well, we know you can't trust yourself, and you don't know enough to really understand what's going on, but we're going to bring out some lab coat wearing scientists. It's really hard to stay serious with a really completely charming epic tabby on your chest like that. Apologies to those.
Sorry about that.
Back
to the horror.
Oh my goodness, it makes things okay. That and the fact of excellent peaches in August helps make things okay. We have most of the public who are not
Science is
scientists
compromised.
have been
Medical
sold a
field
bill of goods, have been assured, and
has been
have believed that the scientists, when they speak, are correct. They know what they're doing because science. Because you've all heard something about self-correcting, yada, 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 and hypothesis maybe, and lots of math, and therefore must be true. And what we see here in an anecdote, in an article filled with stories that are mostly not anecdotes, but this happens to be an anecdote, is about 90% of the scientists at a professional society, the Association for Computing Machinery, she doesn't specify.
They're willing to compromise. That's what she's saying. They're willing to compromise and trade their integrity to fit in with the group. We could go on and on and on. We are running out of time, but I just wanted to bring that to you and show you that this is happening, and we need to not let it happen in the church. We need to tell our pastors, give us the truth, don't be politically correct, and that's the only safe policy. We'll talk to you back next week. God bless.